Okay, good evening, everyone. Kalispera σας. Welcome to the Greek Centre. Allow me to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to tonight's Pontian Genocide Memorial Seminar to be delivered by Dean Kalimniou. It's an annual event co-hosted between the Greek community of Melbourne and Pontic Greeks. But before we commence, can I have you all standing for a minute's silence honouring the victims and those not with us today. You may be seated. Let me just go over some housekeeping items first. Next week, we've got a double header, two seminars during the course of the week. The first one being on Monday evening, same time, our regular time, 7 p.m, and then the regular seminar on Thursday. On Monday, 7 p.m, we'll be honoured to have with us Kostas Politis, who's the president of the Greek community of Tashkent in Uzbekistan, and he'll be delivering a talk on the Greek presence in Asia from antiquity until today. Presently he's in Sydney taking part in a photographic exhibition sponsored by the Greek community of Sydney and New South Wales on the Greek community of Tashkent after the Greek Civil War. It's a fascinating story, and Kostas has been involved in turning around and reinvigorating a dwindling community in the diaspora's periphery. On Thursday's seminar, our Thursday seminar next week will be by Jim Clavin, and I'm sure you all know Jim, and thanks for being here tonight, Jim. It'll be on From Invros from the Sea, Invros and Gallipoli Revealed. It'll be both a presentation, but also a photographic exhibition as well, which will also be here at the mezzanine till the end of the week. You'll receive more details during the course of the week on that. And we hope to see as many of you as possible at both events. Virtually all of May's seminars will be here at the mezzanine. In June, we revert to online, one, because it's winter, two, because a lot of the speakers are from overseas as well. And with respect to tonight's seminar, we'd like to thank the sponsors, Peter Patistea on behalf of AHEPA Victoria, and Oromasiachos in memory of Olga Seranidou thank you for their kind donations, and we welcome you all, encourage you all to become sponsors of a seminar of your choice during the course of the year. Dean Kalimniou has been delivering this memorial seminar for over a decade. Definitely all the time I've been coordinating this seminar series. I recall in the early years, I once mentioned to Litsa, shouldn't you be mixing things up a bit? Maybe alternative speakers, different faces, different personalities. So katokatos grafis, he's not even Pontian. Then Litsa looked at me and gave me this Elena Paparizou-like reply. Nope, Dean's the one. Because he always delivers. And you know what? I tend to agree with her. In fact, the world will come to an end before Dean Kalimniou will run out of topics about the Pontian genocide. So he has just this amazing capacity to find themes and work the angles on so many related topics. In fact, I can only come to one conclusion. That hyperotical bravado he conveys is just all bluff, a facade. He must be a crypto-Pontian, so there's no other explanation. So, yeah. I'm not going to say too much about Dean's biography and achievements. I'm sure most of you are familiar with his frenetic output and contributions on so many fronts, And as a Badagia, we're very grateful to that. It definitely does add a lot of spice to our community. What I will add, though, is that I'd like to congratulate him on the release of his latest book, The Librarian from Cappadocia, Kosti Kalotaxidou. We have received some advance copies for sale for those who are interested as well. They're all at the back. Dean's topic tonight is Pontus the Opera, and I'd like to welcome to the podium Simela Samotopoulou to introduce the topic. Simela, if you can come to the podium, please.
Good evening. Tonight's presentation is an annual event hosted by the Central Pontian Association of Melbourne and Victoria, Pontiaki Estia, Merimna Pontian Greeks and the Greek Orthodox community of Melbourne, in conjunction with the Australian Federation of Pontian Associations. Through an initiative begun by Pontiaki Estia, a speech is given every year in May as part of the Greek Pontian Genocide Commemoration events. We have had the honour of hearing Dean Kalimniou speak about a variety of topics over the years, and we once again look forward to being informed and transported to Pontos, this time through a speech entitled Pontus the Opera. And I must say, Dean has become an honorary Pontian. I'd like to quickly mention also that we are running an exhibition called In the Footsteps of the Genisa Kritas at the community house of the Greek Orthodox community of Dandenong and District at 62 Wilson Road in Hughesdale. It'll run from the 20th till the 29th of May, from 12 to 6 p.m. every day, free entrance, and the launch is going to be held this Monday at 7 p.m. We look forward to seeing you all there. The following is a message by Pontiaki Estia Melbourne. By our presence at this lecture, we want to draw attention to the fact that the victims of the genocide were the most vulnerable section of the community. They were civilians, women and children. They were not armed. They did not commit any acts of violence. They were killed simply because of their race and their religion. We are here to honour their memory, to demand justice, and to make sure that such crimes are never committed against anyone ever again. Με την παρουσία μας σε αυτό το χώρο θέλουμε να επιστήσουμε την προσοχή όλων στο γεγονός ότι τα θύματα της γενοκτονίας ήταν το πιο ευάλωτο τμήμα της κοινότητας. Ήταν άμαχοι πολίτες, γυναίκες και παιδιά. Δεν ήταν οπλισμένοι, δεν διέπραξαν πράξεις βίας. Σφαγιάστηκαν απλώς λόγω της φυλής και της θρησκείας τους. Βρισκόμαστε εδώ για να τιμήσουμε τη μνήμη τους, για να απαιτήσουμε δικαιοσύνη και να διασφαλίσουμε ότι τέτοια εγκλήματα δεν θα διαπραχτούν ποτέ ξανά και εναντίον κανενός. May the memory be eternal.
Now call Dean Kalimniou to the podium. Big round of applause for our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Greek community of Melbourne, for holding these events. Thank you, Merimna Pontian Greeks and Pontiaki Estia. Thank you, sponsors, Peter Patisteas from Achepa, Kyria Romasiakou, in memory of a very special lady and her sacrifice and everything that she went through and her battle with cancer. And we always remember her. Thank you to my two Kariatides. You know, Elton Yannicka wrote the song I'm Still Standing just for this peristasi. And of course, what we learned from this is that being Greek is about suffering and getting absolutely nowhere. So yeah, feel free to sit down if you get tired. I know I will. Pontus the Opera, yeah? Pontus the Opera. Why Pontus the Opera and why not the genocide, which is what we commemorate in May? And I say this every year and I'll say it again because I'm getting old and I tend to repeat myself. You can only, I think, measure the loss incurred by a crime against humanity, not only by counting how many skulls or how many people were lost or what the economic damage was, but also what the cultural damage was. What was lost? What was the cultural heritage that was lost? Now, generally speaking, we have this idea that Pontos is that funny place up in the Black Sea, Panagia Sumela, Kotsari Tik, people in funny hats who speak a strange dialect, yeah? And yet we know that Trapezunda was the terminal end of the Silk Road, which connected Europe with Beijing. Beijing was the other end. We know that Pontos was at the crossroads of civilizations, and yet there's this idea that Pontos is something special, which it is, and then you have the othering of Pontos by the Greek mainstream. Pontos is something which is, yeah, connected to Greece, but very different to us, especially after the Pontian refugees came to Greece. But also that leads then to a discourse of self-othering by the Pontians themselves. Yes, we are different. Yes, we are something else. Yes, we are a bit insular and a bit less inclusive than we'd like to be. And we seek comfort in that for a lot of reasons, all of which are justified and which should bear further examination. What we generally don't discuss within the Greek context is the fact that Pontos was an area whose history was appreciated outside the borders of Greece. In the Middle East, and we can talk about that another time, that's not tonight, but also in Europe. So Pontos, the opera, the opera is not something which is traditionally associated with Greece. Opera, like all the best words, is an Italian word, means works, ergon, which means the ordering of opera in Greek would be ergonomia, ergonomics, which I think is hilarious, but there you go. Especially if you've had to sit through the Ring Cycle and Wagner for, oh God, nightmares. So there's that. And yeah, so why did I decide to do this topic, apart from the fact that I want to talk about the reception of Pontos within the Western culture, specifically through opera, is when I came across this building here. And this building is the opera house of Trapezunda. So when all these other Greeks from Tripoli or Sparti or I don't know where, these Peloponnesian places, my brother-in-law is from Peloponnese, a lovely guy. When everyone talks about contributions to Hellenism and all that idea about being connected, these people had an opera house. This opera house was built in 1912. It was built by the bourgeoisie, the affluent Greek traders of Trapezunda, because obviously they had aspirations of tapping into the European culture and the cachet which comes along with that. It was built by French contractors. It was designed by an Italian in accordance with the European Art Nouveau art movement of the period, and it was built near the Meydan Park in the centre of the city. And obviously the local Greeks of the area financed this. They decided they were going to have opera because they were going to bring themselves into the 20th century. It could house 1,000 people, and obviously it operated as an opera theatre. And there's another picture of it, Trabzon Cinema. This photo was taken in the 1950s, just before it was pulled down. It was pulled down in 1955. After the genocide and after the Greeks left, the Turks didn't know what to do with it. It became a cinema for a while, and then after that it was bulldozed, as many lovely buildings are during the urban renewal phases during that time. So you don't generally associate opera and opera houses with Trapezunda. Trapezunda is all about Panagia Sumela. That for me was the point where I thought, no, I've got to look into this. And then I started discovering that a lot of famous Western composers wrote opera based on topics to do with Pontos. And there's so many of them, and I'll give you a smattering of them tonight, and I think the only person who didn't do this was Kazantzili, but that's beside the point. So, okay, Mozart wrote an opera about Pontos, which was called Mithridate, Re di Pondo, Mithridates, King of Pontos, probably the most famous classical Pontian who ever lived, who was a Pontian in the sense that he lived in Pontos, but obviously was of Persian background. Historically, we've spoken about that before. So in 1770, when Mozart was 14, he travelled with his father Leopold to Italy, and he received a commission from a lovely guy called Count von Firmian. Could have been Firmianidis, no one knows. He started exploring lyrical works and composed Mithridate, Redi Pondo. Mithridates, king of Pondos, inspired by a famous tragedy, a play by a famous playwright of France called Racine. And he's 14 years old. He's dealing with these Italian opera singers who have their voices are a different timbre than the Germans he's used to back home. He's young, so he has to figure out how best to play with their vocal abilities in order to bring out the lovely sentiments, whether it's tragedy, whether it's laughter. And he does it. He dazzles the crowd. He receives another commission for another opera, and this really, really, really made his career. And then the manuscript was vanished, so the opera wasn't played for about 200 years, and it was discovered again in 1971 and staged at the Salzburg Festival. So now I'm going to tell you what this opera is all about, because I think that's a good way of, by way of filler in this lecture. You know, less analysis, more, dude, there he is, Mithridates, Popo. Is he not every inch of Pontian president? I love him. And what do we notice about this Mithridates? There's a sort of a hybrid Hellenistic Renaissance thing happening with the armour, but look underneath, it's almost like quasi-samurai. I say this because, yes, my main contention is that Pondos in one way or another was received into Western civilization, but have a look how. It's not entirely classical here in this production. There's an element of the Orient. So yes, Pondos is within the discourse, but what is its function within the discourse? Have that at the back of your mind while we're talking. So Mithridates is on the Black Sea, yeah? Sovereign of the ancient king of Pondos, and he's got two sons, Opharnakis and Sifare in the Italian libretto. I don't know who that is. And they're all in love with the same princess, Babas και γιος. This is like Lamsi, but on steroids. Aspasia, who's not a historical figure. She's promised to Mithridate, who's leaving to battle Rome, because we know he was the great, he stood up to Rome. But she secretly loves Sifare, this is more like Kalimera Zoe now, who reciprocates her feelings. Pharnakis, being the elder brother, decides to betray his father and allies himself with the Roman enemy. After the battle, Mithridates, who is dying, pardons Pharnakis, who's changed his ways, and blesses Aspasia's marriage to Sifare. And Stamatis Kokotas, Yemu, γιατί δεν άκουσες το δόλιο σου πατέρα, is said to have been inspired by this opera. I can't back that up. So Act 1 begins in the town square of a place called Ninfer, which is a made-up place. Pharnakis hears about his father's death. He tries to seize both the throne and his father's bride. Aspasia asks for Sifare's protection against Pharnaki, and Sifare declares that he can suffer Aspasia's coolness without offense, but his brother is his rival. You know, 7 against thieves and all that. Next we go to the Temple of Venus. Now how powerful is that, yeah? This was in Covent Garden in England, staged. Pharnakis tries to force Aspasia to marry him. Sifare prevents him. Arbatis, who is the town's governor, tells them that Mithridates hasn't died and he's on his way. Imagine now, I mean, if I was going to stage this opera here in Barikia, it'd be like dad, 2 kids, or babas pethane, the 2 kids are off to the lawyer so that they can set up, so they can have the periusia transferred to them and sell everything and go to Greece, and then dad turns out to be alive, oh bugger. He's on his way, he urges peace between the 2 brothers. Aspasia goes off to weep. There's a lot of weeping in this opera. It's done in Italian. Pharnaki suggests that the brothers stop Mithridates from entering the city. The faithful Sifare refuses, no, that's my daddy, but will at least keep their mutual love for Aspasia secret. And Pharnakis conspires with his Roman ally, Marzio. Then, the scene changes and they're in a seaport, no? Mithridates arrives with his Mini, who was formerly betrothed to Pharnaki. This is now like that, what's that new one called that was on Netflix? That show, the Greek show on Netflix. Maestro. He's becoming maestro now because it's like really weird and sick. Pompey has defeated the king on the battlefield. So he's not returning victorious, but at least he has not been disgraced because he fought a good battle. He has brought Ismene to marry his son, but she suspects that he doesn't love her. Mithridates learns that Pharnakis, believing his father is dead, has offered the throne and marriage to Aspasia, but is relieved to hear that Sifare, the dutiful Goody Two-Shoes son, has shown no signs of love for Aspasia. So he vows vengeance on Pharnaki in a thrilling aria called Quel ribello e quel ingrato. Yeah? Then we go to the royal apartments, somewhere in Brighton, I think. Ismene learns that Pharnaki no longer loves her. She threatens to go to Mithridates, I'm telling Dad on you. But he warns her that she could regret her revenge in an aria called Va l'error palesa, which I've got some notes here, short and uninteresting. Mithridates tells her Pharnakis will die. Why not marry Siphace? The king shares his suspicion that Aspasia is Pharnakis' lover with Siphakis. He orders him to remind her of her duty and warns her to beware of his anger. Then Aspasia reveals to Sifare that she loves him, but orders him to be gone. And then Sifare bids her farewell. This is going into the Turkish soaps now. We've left Greece because, you know, the Greeks have switched off because no one slept with each other yet. We're going to the Turkish melodrama. Long, slow, notable aria. Aspasia tries to forget Siphakis, but he's caught between love and duty. Now we're going back to Xanthopoulos. Peace returns to her heart in a dreamlike adagio, and then there's a frenetic allegro complete with these staccatic runs, which reveals her true feelings and all of her anguish. We go off to, there she is being very anguished, as you can see. So the king suspects Pharnakis of treachery, siding with the Romans. He announces he will avenge his defeat by marching on the capital himself. Pharnaki, as Ismene's husband, remember secretly loving Aspasia, but married, he's hedged his bets both ways, will march with him. So the Roman envoy Martio arrives with an offer of peace. Learning that he arrived with Pharnakis, Mithridates arrests his son. Ismene implores the king to be calm, and Pharnaki admits his guilt, but reveals that Sifare loves Aspasia too. So Mithridates, who is known for his paranoia in history, tricks Aspasia into revealing her love for Siphakis. The tyrant imprisons both of his sons, and then before marching on Rome, he will exact the notorious revenge through the slaughter of his sons and his bride, he says. And obviously that has no bearing on the historical truth. He never made it to Rome. Yeah? Spoiler alert. Aspasia asks Sifare to kill her to forestall Mithridates' vengeance. Διώξε και μη λυπάσαι, again, from this. He instead advises her to please Mithridates, swear internal devotion to him, ascend the throne, and let Sifare's cruel fate cost her nothing but tears. So the two resolve to die together. Then we go to what's known as the Hanging Gardens, and there they are doing all of that. I love what they've done here. You can see the phasmata are semi-Greek, but also very Chinese, Oriental. The belt, που πέφτει λοξά, είναι πόρπη, very Anatolian, but Indian at the same time. Think about that. There's a reason for that. In this, I mean, that's not compulsory. Each person stages it the way they want. But there's a reason for that. So we find ourselves now in the Hanging Gardens. Now, the Hanging Gardens are associated with Babylon. They're not associated with Pontus. But here we're in the Orient. It's not the West. And in the Orient, they do things differently. First of all, they're uncontained, you know, according to the Orientalist paradigm. Orientalism, we present the East in such a way as decadent, effeminate, unbridled, sexually subversive, in order to demean it, in order to colonize and dominate it. That's the general potted definition of Orientalism, and that's what's happening here. So I would argue that in Mozart's opera, what we're seeing is Orientalism at work. Yes, we're inspired by Pontus, but what is Pontus representing here? It's representing the unbridled, the passion, you know, all of these people having a massive, well, I can't say it any other way, a sex romp, yeah? That's what this stands as a metaphor for. So we're in the Hanging Gardens. Ismene tries to hang herself. I think that's that, trying to hang herself. She begs for mercy for Aspasia from Mithridates. Mithridates offers marriage to Aspasia in exchange for Sifare's life. She refuses. The Roman army attacks the city walls. Mithridates prepares for battle, and he goes off to meet his fate, but Aspasia will precede him in death. Mithridates has a Moorish servant. We have some what stands in for Moors here. Gives Aspasia a cup of poison to drink. She prepares to commit suicide. Sifare stops her in time and then goes off to fight next to his father. So they're sort of making up. Scene changes. We're now in the interior of a tower adjoining the walls of the city of Nymphaea. Pharnakis, the rebellious son, is in chains. Marcion the Romans, he's the friend of the Romans. Yeah, he's talking to them. He frees them. And the whole idea is that the Romans are going to put him on the throne once Mithridates is defeated and be a puppet. Now, Pharnakis has second thoughts. He repents. No, I want out. Led by reason, not emotion, he will retrace the path of honor. And this is important. Reason is considered a Western attribute. And Mozart would go on to write The Magic Flute. And The Magic Flute is an opera heavily based on Freemasonry, the triumph of reason over barbarism, over obscurantism, over religion, over illogic. So these are the kinds of themes that he's playing with. For him, Mithridates, Pontos, is this idea of the barbarous East where everything goes. The West stands for illumination and logic. And his Pharnakis is, if you like, the door, stometechmio of these two. And he is what will lead possibly the East into that Western type of paradigm. So that's interesting. What was also interesting is that the aria where he repents, Gia degli occhi de velo el tolto, goes on for 9.5 bloody minutes. So I'm going to play it for you now. No, I'm not. Scene changes. We're in the ground floor hall adjoining a grand courtyard of Mithridates' palace. Mithridates is victorious. You see the Roman fleet burning in the background, but he's mortally wounded. The guards carry the king dying on a litter. He stabbed himself rather than surrender to the Romans. Suddenly the tyrant becomes a magnanimous, loving father, reunited with the three people he tried to kill, because that's just the way we do things in Pontus. He dies, and his family vow to resist Rome. So, what a remarkable piece of opera from a young guy who was 14 when he composed it, on the cusp of adolescence, beginning the struggle that would make him a man or a moose. And why would he choose this for his theme? Tyrannical father, wants to kill his son, who is jealous of his son's burgeoning sexual prowess, who takes away his son's swords. The whole idea of the two dutiful sons, the good Sifare, who's not that good, the son Mozart thinks he must be to please his father because there's that personal element, the son his father maybe wants him to be, projecting that, and the bad, in inverted commas, Pharnakis, the disobedient son, the one who wants to take his father's position, and his father's woman, and who sides with his father's enemy. So that's playing, because Mozart had daddy issues, very big ones. Leopold was a tyrant. So the opera ends with the death of the father, succeeded or supplanted by his sons. Basically, apart from playing with the Orientalist paradigm, Mozart uses Pontos in order to kill his daddy. And this was all before Freud was invented. So, Aspasia is the stepmother, a safe way for Mozart to deal with his mother fixation. In a gloriously, I can only term it a phallic type of symbolism. She wants Sifare to run her breast through with his sword before his father can. Seriously, tell me about your mother. Unable to cope with these unsettling Oedipal urges, the five main characters try and kill themselves. Wow, the Thanatos urge. I mean, it's all Freud. It's all there. Where are we? Yeah. So, I don't think I need to convince you that Mithridates Redipondo is a work of decadence. I think it is. You have a careful, elaborate plot construction. You have strong characterization, and it's almost like opera by numbers. Ancient world, Near East, tyrant, half-siblings, one good, one bad, rivals in love, jilted mistress, battles. Surprisingly, it doesn't have a woman disguised as a man, because we see a lot of that, or a man disguised as a woman. And I think it exists in a different temporal dimension altogether. You just compartmentalize it in its own pocket universe, like the event horizon of a black hole. It slows down time. It's wonderful. If you ever get the chance to see it, and it's not really played off and performed, go and do it. I mean, there he is, the barbarian king. O Proedros, I'll leave you with that one. So we've heard about Mithridates. There's an opera about Pharnakius, who, as we know, was Mithridates' son, but Mozart didn't write that. The person who wrote Pharnakius was none other than Antonio Vivaldi, the composer of the Four Seasons, Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest. He wrote the Four Seasons in order to impress a girl. And I don't know, it gets me going every time. Now, he set it to a libretto by Antonio Lucchini, but that was initially set by none other than Leonardo da Vinci, which I find amazing, because it's true. It's one of the times where I posit something and it's actually true. So it's first performed in 1727 in Venice, very popular, revived with great success at the Spork Theatre in Prague in 1730. And then that slipped into oblivion until the last quarter of the 20th century, when it emerged from obscurity. It's considered one of the best scores from Vivaldi's later period of operatic writing. And fascinatingly, and this passed us all by, because we tend to be a bit omphallocentric in this community, it was performed in Sydney in 2019. So it explores honour and love in the aftermath of war in Pontus. No, again, a kingdom on the threshold of Europe and Asia, that liminal space between two civilizations, two ways of thought. A region experiencing unrest, bringing this story pretty close for comfort, especially these days with all that's going on in the Middle East. And as we'll see, this opera is, the modern stagings of it do communicate with what's going on in the current world. So the plot, there's Pharnakis, king of Pontus, has been defeated, and in order to avoid falling into the hands of the enemy, he commands his wife, Tamiri, to kill their son and then herself. Tamiri's mother, Vereniki, hates Pharnaki. Pethera, Ikakia Pethera, that's not Pontian, that's just universal. We love the Ikakia Pethera. And she's in cahoots with Pompey, the Roman victor, to kill him. Selinda, who is Pharnaki's sister, is taken captive by the Roman Aquilius, who falls in love with her. Stockholm syndrome, as does Vereniki's captain, Giladis. Giladis, what a Pontian name. Idis. Selinda plays off one against the other in an attempt to save her brother, and then somehow it ends happily ever after, and everyone is spared, and it's all great, because that's how things roll in 18th century opera. Now, the opera lends itself to various interpretations. It was restaged in England by Thomas Hull as Pharnakis with a PH, or The Revenge of Athridatis. When you don't have a Thridatis, you have an Athridatis. So that was staged in 1765 or thereabouts, and recently Vivaldi's version was staged in Venice, where you're seeing these pictures, and set somewhere in the Middle East, in which Pharnaki and his supporters were presented as a band of Islamist guerrillas. You can see some veils, you can see some stereotypical pictures there, while Vereniki and Pompey's forces were of Western origin. So we contrast that. They look quite Western and fascistic, with that, they look like Afghan refugees. I think it's a very good interpretation. So it's a really, really good score. Vivaldi responds to the libretto with some really, really fine music, but he only, I think, really skims the surface of the characters. And then too often when a character is expressing really extreme, poignant, deep emotions, Vivaldi's music is charming and entertaining, and it's kind of like me now trying to impart information to you, but then resorting to smut and too many jokes. He writes wonderful virtuoso vocal lines, but too often the main interest is in the orchestra and getting the music across rather than the characters. But then again, that was one of the prevailing styles of the time, so can we blame him? Possibly not. But we can illustrate this through the three final arias at the end of Act 1. Berenike sings, "The sword which shed my hapless husband's blood has taught me to be cruel," and you have nothing to do with what's being said. And then Tamiri has a similar aria about a fierce lion, and you've got to have a lion. And finally, Pompey has another similar aria about a tempest. And Vivaldi gives Berenike and Tamiri, wonderful toe-tapping arias which don't scratch the surface of their anger. They're angry at everything that's going on. Pompeo's aria is an absolutely glorious evocation of a storm, and he does great things when he's doing storms. The fourth movement of the Four Seasons, Winter, where he basically portrays the storm. It's amazing. So he's great to do that. Which it's just Vivaldi showing off. Look, I can conjure a storm, but nothing about Pompey's state of mind. It's light, it's airy, it's Italian. Too much Italian? You guys decide, yeah? Now, the last of the operas of this period that I want to deal with is not really an opera, but a character from an opera. There are at least 24 operas about Tigranes, the Great of Armenia. And then the joke is that, what did they say to Tigranes when they saw him? Tigranes, kala. I thought I'd try that on. I've never tried that one before. Most of these operas are lost. Most of them are lost. But Tigranes was an amazing guy. He was almost a Mithridates-like figure. He was Mithridates' father-in-law. And he created a greater Armenia, which began in Armenia and ended in Syria. He's the great hero of the Armenian people. He's also captured the imagination of the West, but that's another story. There are three extant operas about Tigranes, one by Haas, one by Vivaldi, one by Gluck. All three bear the title Il Tigrane, and they're all based on the same libretto by Silvani, not the footballer. There's no G in that one. And in them, a major character is Queen Cleopatra of Pontus. We all know Cleopatra, and we associate Cleopatra with Egypt. There was a Queen Cleopatra of Pontus. Thank you very much. You Cretans can't claim everything. That's it. Now, Cleopatra of Pontus was instrumental in making Tigranes the greatest king in Armenian history, one of the greatest kings of the Middle East, by the alliance through marriage of the two mighty nations, Armenia and Pontus. And if anyone has entered into a marital alliance between Pontians and Armenians, fireworks and sparrows, let me tell you. So, if you listen to the various operas, the various arias in the three operas, what becomes interesting is to gauge how the composers adjust their tempi, their style, sensitively to match the shifting emotions that Princess Cleopatra traverses as she reacts to various things along the way. Her father's impending marriage to her own rival Apamia, or her beloved Tigranes' declaration that he will die in battle against her stubborn father rather than live without her. How many people say that before they get married? But that, he insists, she should also live on. So in Vivaldi's opera, we hear three arias. One is Chi mentre mormorando, where Cleopatra sings of her love of King Tigranes, despite him being an enemy. The aria is short. I think it's delightful because it's short. It's delicate murmuring strings. And then there's a famous scene where Cleopatra falls asleep, as you're all about to do now. She then responds passionately to her father's forbidding of her love for Tigranes, and it's a really striking and dramatic scene. Then there's La Scera l'amata salma, where she expects to die, as in all operas people should. It's a very gallant aria in which she looks forward to dying, looks forward to Elysium, rather than exploring the emotional torture Cleopatra is going through, because it's light and it's Italian. She appears in 5 arias in Hass's opera with the same libretto. She responds angrily to the suggestion from a rival that she will give up her love for Tigrane, and you get some really passionate, really strident belting out of tune there. Then she's overcome with remorse, having quarreled with Tigrane, so you get that. And then features some really strong low notes, which are pretty, they reverberate. And then there's a gallant aria, which gives a sense of vibrant style. Lately, there's an Armenian opera singer called Bayraktaryan, and she does a really good job. I think it's Elena Bayraktaryan. And it's an opera which is very popular in Armenia, but really hasn't been played in Greece, which I think is a pity. Then there's, in Act 2, there's the aria Strapane pure il seno, where Cleopatra's response to her father when he forbids her to love Tigrane is her wish to die. And then her response to Tigrane's news that he would rather die than accept life without her. That turns into a graceful aria with leaps, which is possibly easier to sing than expressive of Cleopatra's emotional situation. So they're the classical operas based on real-life figures, but obviously departing completely from the historical truth. It's like if we did a opera about Stalin, where he actually doesn't kill anyone. It just makes no sense. So, my favourite out of all the operas purportedly set in Pontos or inspired by Pontos is The Princess of Trebizond, The Princess of Trapezunda, an opera bouffe, so a comic opera, by Jacques Offenbach. Offenbach is what you get when you leave bark out in the fridge overnight. Forget to put... I did that one last year as well, but I like that joke. And that was first performed in 1869, and we're going to go through that because it's my favourite opera. So, there it is. La Princesse de Trebizond by Offenbach. Okay. So, there's a guy called Cabriolo. Yeah? Μπες μες στο Cabriole. Μπες μες στο Cabriolo. Πάμε για μια όπερα. He's the proprietor of a sideshow in a travelling fun fair, as you are. I mean, we would argue that the whole Parikia is a circus, but there we go. The attractions in the sideshow include a group of waxworks, with the highlight being an exceptionally beautiful one of the Princess of Trapezunda. So among the members of the travelling entertainers, there's also Cabriolo's sister Paola, which is a really Pontian name, who has an act, his daughters Zanetta and Regina, and Tremolini, who is Regina's long-suffering sweetheart. So while dusting off the waxwork of the Princess of Trapezunda, Zanetta accidentally breaks its nose off, but in order to save the show, she offers to impersonate the statue herself. Dude. Madame Tussaud, eat your heart out. Then there's a young nobleman called Prince Raphael and his tutor Sparadrap. Okay. They come to visit the fun fair, and instead of paying for admission in money, the prince drops a lottery ticket into the collection box in order to gain admission to the show. I don't know if it was the Set for Life or which one it was, but anyway. Prince Raphael falls madly in love with what he thinks is the waxwork of the princess. So are we seeing Pygmalion here? No. Or is this just something really, really weird and we shouldn't go deeper? I don't know. I'm not going to go deeper. That just freaks me out. The troupe of entertainers are amazed and overjoyed to receive the news, and the lottery ticket has also won, and the prize is, drumroll, a castle, which is lovely. So Act 2 is the castle. So 6 months have passed, and Cabriolo and his band of entertainers are finding life in the castle nearly as glamorous as they imagined it would be. Not really. They're bored. They miss their previous lives as travelling players. They've got no one to argue constitutional change in the Greek community with. Out on a hunting trip, Prince Raphael catches a glimpse of a girl who seems to be his Princess of Trebizond. He goes, how's this? You know, I've fallen in love with the waxwork. She actually moves. I don't want that. She's got a free will. Yuck. So he makes a detour into the castle, and Zanetta eventually admits that it was her in disguise that she saw that day in the circus. Sorry, I'm not waxwork, I'm a real human being. I hope you can deal with that. Raphael and Zanetta hatch a plan to stay together. Raphael's father, Prince Casimir, and his tutor, Sparadrap, present themselves at the castle. Raphael persuades his father to purchase all the waxworks figures of the old sideshow. You know, there's variety, one for every day. and to make Gabriolo the curator of a museum containing all of them. Then they return to Casimir's palace. You can tell why I like this, because it just makes no sense at all. Gabriolo has now been elevated to the title of Baron Cascatella, which, if you're a Pontian and you just do this and be as a statue, eventually you guys will become nobility, so there is compensation after the show. You hope so. I think you're going to be sadly disabused of your misapprehension. But anyway. So he and his family, along with the waxwork show, are living in Prince Casimir's palace. Tremolini and Regina have rekindled a romance. Sparadrap and Paola have fallen for each other. It's all lovey-dovey. Raphael, the prince, has kept up the pretense of being in love with a waxwork doll. Because while being in love with a waxwork is harmless enough, you think, his father would never allow him to marry a girl so far below him as Zanetta is. Now think of the class implications of that. I'm happy for you to love an inanimate object, but don't you dare love a woman who's below your station. Or from the other Pontian club. I'm just throwing that one out there. Now, finding out that Prince Casimir is going out on a nighttime hunting expedition, that's a euphemism for something, but I know what it is. Raphael plans an extravagant supper for himself and Zanetta. Plans are made to meet later, that evening in the Castle Museum, and then Tremolini and Regina and Sparadrap and Paola also make plans to meet in the same place, because that's how these things work. There's a concatenation of circumstances. It's all very Shakespeare. They all chance upon each other all of a sudden, then the atom gets split and boom. So after much confusion, all three couples are discovered by Gabriolo, who has come to visit his beloved waxworks, and they all sit down to a magnificent supper. Apparently that's important, the fact that it's magnificent. I can't stress this enough. Prince Casimir is suspicious. He's returned early from the hunt, and after a certain amount of elaborate pretense by Gabriolo, it's revealed that his son is in love with the circus performer. Good God. And really in love, as you can see from that. But then it's discovered that the prince himself once had been married to a lady acrobat, so there's nothing wrong with that. After all, this is 2024. Who turns out to be Paola's long-lost sister, because we got to make it more weird than it already is. So he can't offer any objection to his son's choice. And the work concludes with festive preparations for a triple marriage. It's an engaging, if somewhat preposterous, comedy about nouveau riche values, class distinctions, social mobility. I love it. It's got a score that races and fizzes like a well-tuned steam train. And it teases you about upwardly mobile social ambitions and pretensions and an infantilized ruling class. So here's Pontos as being ergaliopiite, manipulated as a way of commenting on class inequality in almost fin de siècle, the Western world. So I think that the emphasis or interest in Pontos is not only restricted to modern times. There's other operas in the liminal space between East and West, which also are relevant here, in my opinion. And one of those operas is Diogenes, which is a one-act chamber opera by a Czech composer called Ilya Hurnik, based on his own theme and libretto. He wrote the theme tune, sings the theme tune, performed for the first time in 1976. So this is, I think, one of the latest operas which have been inspired by Pontos, not that long ago, by the Brno Mini Opera in the Czech Republic. It's inspired by Diogenes the Cynic, possibly my favorite Pontian of all time, from Synopsis, the guy who, according to Diogenes Laertius's book, Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers, which I'm actually reading now, he made a virtue of poverty, and he also spoke truth to power. He begged for a living, often slept in a large ceramic jar or a pithos in the marketplace, as you do. He used his simple lifestyle and behaviour to criticise the social values and the norms and institutions of what he saw as a corrupt and confused society. He had a reputation for sleeping and eating wherever he chose, and he, in a highly non-traditional fashion. That's a euphemism for the fact that he also defecate in public places and did whatever he felt like doing. And that was, in his opinion, part of being free. He declared himself a cosmopolitan, and we have the doyen of cosmopolitanism in the room, and a citizen of the world, rather than claiming allegiance to just one place or one club. Again, just throwing that out there. And obviously, most famously, he told off Alexander the Great for blocking his son. Can I do something for you, Diogenes? Anything? Yeah, get out of the bloody way, you're blocking my son. I love him. So, this is an opera which teaches us that music comes in many forms. There's Apollo who received music as a gift from the gods, and he conducts it perfectly and precisely according to the rules. He keeps his vocal cords in proper exercise and expects success with admirers of all ages and conditions. On the other hand, there's a faun in this opera who always reinvents music and can play anything he can get his hands on. A shell, a willow twig, finally a hollow bone. I'm not sure he knew what a kemençe was, but if he did, he would have put it in the opera. I think he should. His immediate musicianship can make everyone happy, and he's no different when he notes down a few notes on the whistle in front of a barrel in which the famous philosopher Diogenes lives. And he leaves the whistle next to Diogenes' big barrel or pithos or whatever you want to call it. Now, Diogenes' philosophy in this opera is based on the teaching that in order to be perfectly happy, one must get rid of all material possessions. You're happy when you own nothing. It's very zen. The philosopher also threw away his last bowl of food. We know that. But the whistle fascinates him. Comes, says, what the hell is this? He tries to play it. He perfects the technique of playing, the fingering. Then he drills more holes in it to get more notes out of it, and he makes a song out of them. At the same time, he experiences a happiness that he had long forgotten, because philosophers are miserable gits. We know this. The faun explains to a beautiful girl that just passing by the way, the philosophers, she's the only disciple of the philosopher, that creating music brings true joy. So Diogenes intersperses his musical experiments with philosophical considerations. His attitude towards life changes. He begins to tell people about his childhood and opens his heart to a girl he barely noticed before. This is what happens to Pontian presidents after they lose office. Everything seems to be going well now. They're already planning their future together, but Diogenes keeps returning to the whistle. And then the girl becomes jealous of the bone. I want the bone too. Do not deprive me of this bone. It's not only your bone, it's my bone. And she reproaches the astonished sage for valuing the hollow bone more than her and leaves him. So if we were going to stage this today, Diogenes would be playing with a PlayStation or one of those things. I don't know. What are they called? Because I'm old now, I don't know. These things were invented after I finished childhood. So now Diogenes sees the girl leaving and he's disappointed, and he sees in this a confirmation of his original philosophy. To achieve happiness, one must get rid of all things, including the whistle, but not the girl. So he throws her into the sea, and then for a moment he seems to be satisfied. But then when evening falls, he's sad that he's lost the whistle. In vain he calls the sea to return his whistle and regrets the happiness he has lost. And then what does he do? He crawls back into his pithos and sucks. And then a girl's voice can be heard from afar, Diogenes, my love. And the sage's choir comforts him. Do not grieve, for you are happy. You have a desire after all, and that is more than fulfilled. And the opera comes to a close. So there you have a number of operas that have as their inspiration Pontos. And again, in most of those operas, we see Pontos described as a strange place, a place which is the diametric opposite of the West, a place of fascination. We see that in also how these operas are staged even today, where you have absolute freedom as to how you will stage these operas. They are almost exclusively set in the Orient. Now, if you ask the Pontians of their day in Byzantine or in ancient times how they felt, I don't know what they would have said, but I think that they would have thought that they were part of a broader world with connections through East and West. Here is the West compartmentalizing the Pontians, receiving them into the culture as a paradigm of otherness, just as the Greeks in their national narrative also receive Pontos and make that a paradigm of otherness when it suits them, and then Hellenes when it on other occasions when that's convenient as well. So these are the things which are fascinating about this. The last opera for me is fascinating because it's got nothing to do with that. It's just focusing on one period, one person who happens to come from Pontus, but that's a philosophical meditation about happiness and being true to oneself, I think. I think that's enough. Or would you like to hear more about opera? I can sing if you want. No, that's not going to happen. So, Nico has the roving mic. If there are any questions.
Dean, once again, you surely didn't disappoint. So,
I'm glad you think so.
The floor is open to questions. You're usually not a shy lot. Oh, wait, someone at the back.
Thanks, Nick. I thought I'd get you to run all the way down here. Dean, dazzling as ever.
You know just what to say to a girl, don't you, Martina?
Almost funny a couple of times too.
Yeah, I know.
That concentration of operas, the classical operas you referred to around the 1720s, 1730s, why was there such a fascination in Central Europe or Western Europe at that point in time with Pontus itself? What sparked their imagination for that initial cluster?
Okay. I don't think there was a specific fascination with Pontus. I think we look at it in a broader context of operas to do with classical times. Remember that most of the zeitgeist of the period was reading the classics, rediscovering the classics, interpreting the classics. That was received into the civilization of the West. It informed their thought process, it developed the philosophy, all of that thing. This is just part of it.
Yeah, cool.
So your odd opera deals with things that they would have read in Plutarch or other texts.
Yeah,
Plutarch talks about Mithridates, and he's a big figure, so they would have read that. Easy enough Greek to understand if you're studying ancient Greek, and it would have gone from there.
Cool, thank you.
Do we know anything more than what you gave us tonight about the opera itself?
Τι εννοείται?
Το κτίριο.
Το κτίριο,
Ναι.
I've been trying to find out things. I've spoken to some Turkish friends who were on the case, because what I want to know is what operas would have been staged there.
Yeah.
What were the operas that the Greeks were interested in? Yeah, but unfortunately, there was the genocide. Μεσολάβησε αυτό. The records were lost in all of the catastrophe and people trying to. I don't think people paid attention. I don't think it's recorded anywhere. I've also asked in Athens, where they have το αρχείο της Μικράς Ασίας, and people are looking for it, but I don't have that information.
You also would have imagined in Kimberlitz, Turkey, their, let's say, music taste might have been moved more towards the West. They'd want to retain the opera house. But
Yeah, look, I mean, Atatürk loved the opera, but he had to carry everyone with him, and that's a slow process, isn't it? Yeah.
Veering a little away from the opera, I'd like to explore this idea of Pontians being the other. In your opinion, what do you think that they are seen as the other, and will this change? Is it likely to evolve so they're not? They sort of.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty clear. I think that Greeks often see them as the other. One example of that, in my opinion, and it is my opinion, is the fact we talk about a Pontian genocide, not a Greek genocide. No, the Armenians talk about an Armenian genocide. The Assyrians talk about an Assyrian genocide. But we specifically say Pontian genocide, even we know that that's not true. On the other hand, the Pontians also see themselves as the other. And they self-other. You know, sometimes you talk to a Pontian and you say, look, it's not a Pontian genocide, it's a Greek genocide, and they get upset because they lose their exclusivity. Some Pontians, not all Pontians. Because what happens is, if you are defined by a discourse, on occasion you internalise that discourse, and then you respond to it in your own way, and you make that discourse your own, and you get power from that discourse in a way which is unpredictable. And I think there's a little bit of both going on. Will that ever change? I don't know. I don't know if a distinct Pontian, in 100 years' time, whether we'll be still talking about a distinct Pontian identity the way we understand it now. These things evolve. What is a Pontian? Is it a person who has memories of a distant homeland? Is it a person who lives in Pondos, speaks Romaica but is Muslim? Is it a person in Australia who no longer speaks Pontian but identifies with Pondos? I think that's purely subjective. All of them deserve study.
Thank you for your talk. I'm not sure I have a coherent question, but I think it's really interesting, this idea of where is East, where is West, who is other, who is us. And I'm looking at the Magna Grecia, the Megalea Las in southern Italy at the moment. And it's fascinating, the idea that Herodotus, a lot of early writers, for them, the Italiotes, the Greek settlers, are the real people. The rest, the southern Italians, are barbarians that they encounter there. The British at the time of the British Empire, who many public school boys who studied at public schools did their classics.
Exactly.
For them, southern Italy is Oriental. They look for ancient Greece in southern Italy, and it's wrong. It's Eastern. It's Oriental. It's effeminate, as you said. As I say, it's not a coherent question, it's just an interesting observation that even the Greeks have been saying.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I mean, you look at Pontus, when we refer to the Pontians, and I mean, you can make what you will of it. For the West, Pontus is the land of the others, you know. Mithridates is semi-barbarian. I mean, he comes from a Persian royal family. Yes, he's Hellenizing, but his roots are in Persia. His family contacts are in Persia. He's on that cusp, you know. He's that liminal space between civilization, in inverted commas, and barbarism, okay? When we, in our discourse, think of Pontians, we do a similar thing. On the one hand, there are the Topondiaco, Antarctico, and the manly dances, and Kotsari, Tik, and all of that, and gets your blood blown, macho, testosterone, all of that, testosteronidis. But at the same time, there's that feminization, Pontus as the victim, the one who has been violated. Yeah, there's all of that. And then there's all that psychological baggage that goes with that. Pity, revulsion, the whole works.
Do we have any final questions? Or? Okay. Do you have your hand up? Or?
Why was Opera House knocked down?
Probably they wanted to build a McDonald's or I don't know. I mean, why were so many beautiful buildings knocked down in Athens or in Melbourne or urban renewal? It happens. It happens. There are inexplicably beautiful buildings that were pulled down in Athens and here and everywhere around the world. These things just happen. You know, nothing lasts forever. Whelan the Wrecker was here, yeah?
Well, why did Greeks in Melbourne knock down fireplaces? You know.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I think we'll bring things to a close.
Sorry, can I have a round of applause for these two lovely people here? I think they did brilliantly. So sorry, guys. No. All art is suffering.
And just a small gift that Lisa wants to present. Or?
Just quickly. It's okay.
You sure you still want to present it after that? No? Okay. Thank you,
We'd like
Lisa.
to thank Dane.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very, very much. This happens every year.
Κάτσε να δούμε τι είναι πρώτα before I say
Και εγώ θέλω να ευχαριστήσω αυτά τα όμορφα παιδιά που καθίσαν εδώ μία ώρα, αλλά είναι τιμή τους που είναι εκεί και φαίνονται πανέμορφοι, στολίζουν και την αίθουσα. Να ευχαριστήσω και λίγο την κυρία που είναι πίσω, εκεί, την Νούλα την Παύλου, που μας προσέχει κάθε χρόνο με καφεδάκι και γλυκό. Και να σας πούμε ότι την Κυριακή θα είμαστε στο Άξιον Εστί. Το πρωί θα γίνει κατάθεση Στεφάνου πίσω από την εκκλησία.
Πες τι ώρα.
Αρχίζουμε από τις 10. Ναι. Κατά τις 12 θα γίνει η κατάθεση Στεφάνη και μετά οπωσδήποτε.
Και επιμνημόσυνη δέηση.
Και η μνημόσυνη δέηση. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Έπρεπε να τα πεις εσύ, που τα ξέρεις όλα.
Είσαι ο πρόεδρος.
Δεν είμαι πρόεδρος. Λοιπόν, σας ευχαριστούμε. Να είστε καλά.
And Dil will hang around to sort of sign his book for those interested in purchasing it as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you next week as well. Bye.